You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Curious how ancient elemental principles could be the key to modern holistic healing? Discover more in today's episode. This episode contains strong language and listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we explore the ancient wisdom of the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth, and how they can be applied to create a more balanced and natural way of living. We dive into how these elemental principles offer a fresh perspective on holistic health, guiding us to align with nature and find harmony in our daily lives. Dr. Howard Walsdorf is a veteran holistic chiropractic and natural healer, author, speaker, and expert in the ancient wisdom of the four elements in natural living. His latest book, Fire, Air, Water, and Earth, Apply an Ancient Wisdom to Your Life, aims to revitalize modern society by introducing a compelling new holistic paradigm for healthier living and healing, integrating the principles embodied by the four elements. As the founder of the Four Element Institute and visionary behind the growing holistically community, Dr. Walsdorf is on a mission to inspire and educate people to think, live, and heal in more natural ways. Let's meet Dr. Howard Walsdorf. Hi, Dr. Walsdorf. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because the four element model is such a fascinating topic for our conversation today, and I can't wait to learn more. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely.
So this four elements that I'm here to bring forward has been a passion of mine for 4 decades now.
Wow.
So I've been working at it, fine-tuning it, researching it, and applying it with my patients over these decades. And I'm excited to be with you and share it with you and your audience as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, for bringing all that wisdom to our episode today. I know this will be fantastic for our listeners to connect with.
Well, I hope so.
Would you like to start us off with a little bit about yourself and your own story, maybe how your journey connects to what you do today and the elements that you work with, and maybe tell us a bit about what you do today?
Sure. I began my journey with the four elements back when I was a kid. And I think as a child, other kids, just like myself, would play in the woods, and nature was a big part of my life. And my mother would call me her nature boy. You know, my 2 brothers were into other things, but we all played in the woods. And I think about, I don't know if you ever heard the Moody Blues, but there's a song that the trees are calling to me. I got to find out why. Something like that stuck with me back in those early adolescent days. And I just felt nature as something very powerful. And I sensed it in a way that I think was deeper than many other people. For some reason, it took hold in me. And I built upon that by going to a New York State College of Environmental Science and Forestry. So I became what we call up there in Syracuse a Stumpy. So I was immersed in the natural sciences, and I wanted to understand how nature worked. And so I was dedicated to that, and I learned lots of great things about the biology of life and nature and plants. I was a botany major. Minor, I like to say, in entomology, which are the insects, the insect world. And I still to this day believe that insects are an underappreciated part of the natural world that is beautiful in their own way, even as we might swat them away from our lunches as we're eating outside or whatever. But anyhow, I was always focused on nature, and I somehow felt it embodied something spiritual, and I was looking for that. And I took yoga courses in undergrad school as a kind of an elective, and so I was exposed to kind of the spiritual sensibility of the body. And there was a Kundalini yoga class, a bunch of classes for years that I took. I was even president of the SU Kundalini Yoga Club. So I was really into it for a while, and I felt kind of this spiritual connection to that the physical world and our body as part of it was an embodiment of something spiritual, for lack of a better word, and that nature also had those spiritual principles or energetics to it. And then probably the most important thing I took at that point extracurricularly was a course on astrology. And I really got into astrology because I don't know if your people realize this, but it's 4 element based. That's really the 4 elements really got underneath my skin or whatever you want to call it as. And I have never let go of it since then, since taking that course in astrology 4 decades ago. And I just came to appreciate that what the ancients called fire, air, water, and earth embodied these spiritual principles that nature helps us to understand. And that the ancients, and I like to say that the ancients, the wise and the smartest of the ancients knew that these 4 elements meant something. And what people don't realize, what I try to write in my book, is that, for 4,000 years, these 4 elements were an important part of the human history of Western civilization. Most people don't even know that at the core of Western civilization are the 4 elements, fire, air, water, and earth. The Greeks worked with them, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Egyptians, everybody believed and understood that there was something special about the sun, the air, the water, and the earth. And that's my quick story on how I found them. And then I've incorporated them in my life, in my own healing, in my own evolution as an individual. And I'll talk more about that perhaps as we go on and how I've applied that with my patients as well. But that's my short story of how I had this, then I became a chiropractor. And I went to chiropractic college as I realized that through, I guess, yoga, how I felt the body had these same principles working within it. When I went to chiropractic college, I thought that these professors would kind of help me see this holistic way of approaching the body, not necessarily with the 4 elements, but just something with a kind of a spiritual component to our human body. And they failed me. But I took it upon myself to I was going to figure it out. I remember a student in one of the classes asked for something like, can you help me as a student to put it all together, all this knowledge? And the professor said, no, it's up to you to figure it out. I remember thinking right then and there that, by golly, I'm going to figure it all out. And as it turns out, the 4 elements were really there to assist me in ways that I would never have imagined. So I'm here really to bring back these 4 elements. So few people are really talking about, at least in the schematics of how I try to bring it forward. People talk about astrology and the 4 elements and certain paganistic 4 element worship or whatever, but that's really not my MO. My MO is to help people to see that nature helps us to understand in the realness of itself what these cardinal principles of life are and how we can use them to balance our own journey and our own goals and remove our own stresses if we can apply them properly and get on with our life in the way that we want to and reach our professional and personal goals, for that matter, to make them practical. That's the earth element, is physical practicality, if you will. That makes sense for you, Petra? Do you understand a bit of that, or might be too abstract?
Sharing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your journey and everything that you have learned. You sound like quite the pioneer doing yoga and learning about the 4 elements before really that became a lot more mainstream. So good on you for
I guess so. I've always been an outlier.
That.
Yeah. I'm an outlier. Still am, I guess.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I am wondering a little bit while you're explaining about your connection to the elements and sort of our ancient connection to that. Can we understand this as that we all are these elements and maybe there is a more dominant one that comes forward? Or is this more something that we work with externally and then that does something internally to us? How do you view that?
Right. From a holistic perspective, they're embodied within us. They play out, like I say, in nature's sun, air, water, and earth. They play out, I like to say, in our body, mind, and spirit, that holistic triad of body, mind, and spirit. Let me even talk about the body end of this, of our being, because I like to get people to understand the practicality and how they are not. My MO, to be honest with you, is that everything is spiritual mumbo jumbo. If it doesn't have this physicality of the real world, that these principles need to have the muster of this physical world to really be true and real and valid. and not just mumbo jumbo. So that's my MO. And I think my research kind of has validated. They haven't failed me yet, these four elements. So anyhow, to get to the body of the thing, to make it more apparent, perhaps, I oftentimes start when I give these talks on earth. And as a chiropractor, I'm focused on earth being the bones. I don't think it's that hard. I try to bring my patients quickly up to speed on this. And I don't get overly into it necessarily, but their bones are the earth element of their body. That foundation of their lives are the bones. And what bones, what the earth element is meant to give us, is alignment and good posture. Can you see how that might be all part of that earth element dimension of our lives, Petra? Does that make sense to you at least?
Yeah, it does. It gives us sort of that very denser and stable piece of that element,
exactly.
I think. Yeah.
And we all want sturdiness. What I try to say is earth is that sturdiness that we want. And if we don't have enough, that earth element, that earth principle, I call it. So you have these elements that are the embodiment of a principle. And there's sort of a metaphysics to how these principles might have evolved. And I'm not going to necessarily get into that with you. We might touch upon it later. It's moved in that direction. But for the most part, just to say that earth is the fourth of the principles. I like to say there's an order to these principles: fire, air, water, earth. And I like to say that to an American audience, it's the way somebody from Boston might say four, the four elements. So it's fire, air, water, and earth. The E of four is silent, if you get my gist. So earth is at the bottom and fire is at the top. Nature's sun is at the top, and the terra firma of earth is below our feet. So anyhow, bones are the denser, the earthiest part of ourselves. It makes sense, I think. And what I like to tell my patients, for example, is that, and I like to bring it quickly into this holistic paradigm, because what holism says is that there's these patterns. So my theory here, my hypothesis that I work with over these decades is that the fire, air, water, and earth of these four cardinal principles, they get expressed on every level of the cosmos. I mean, that's how far I take this, is that the four forces of physics, if anybody out there in podcast land are physicists, they'll recognize that there's four states of matter. And there's the solid, liquid, gas, and then there's the plasma state, for example. There's the four forces of physics, that gravity and electromagnetism are two of them. There's the strong force and the weak force of physics as well. But then getting back to our body here, so we have the bones, for example, the earth element of our body. Up top, opposite that, might be thinking of the fire element as our nerves. Think of nerves as the highest part of our being. It's the most ethereal. Just like the sun and the light that shines out from the sun is the most ethereal. Does that make sense to you? It's less physical, the light, correct? Does that make sense? So that's the highest of the four elements. The sun is up top and earth is at the bottom. And between them is air and water. So air is lighter than water. So getting back to the body. So we have the bones of the body being the earth of the body. And we depend on earth for sturdiness. So our quotient of sturdiness becomes relevant for me because so many people today in my practice, especially young people, I have to say, more and more over the last decade or two, I'm seeing more and more weakness of that earth force, the earth energetics, which people are becoming less and less sturdy. Earth is about the sturdiness of our bones, and it's about the sturdiness of our being, our lack of being able to be resilient against the stresses of our lives because we just don't have that sturdiness that earth is meant to give us. I kind of start from the bottom up, and I try to help my patients to realize, well, good posture helps that earth element to work well within us. And then I try to give them practical things that they can do. And this is one thing that I'll share right now is just one practical things that people out there in podcast listening world might appreciate is the human act of walking. Can you see how walking might be an earthy? It actually combines all these four principles, if you will. And let me add this. You can get away and go all different directions here, but let me say this is that in something like walking, everything that's productive in our life, in a holistic way, all these principles are involved in it, just like they're all involved in our body. And as we work with four elements, we'll realize that some bones have more of that fire element in them, even though so these four principles are holistically intertwined. So there's fire and water and air element bones, as it turns out. Getting back to walking, I like to tell my patients, for example, that while all the bones of their body are the earth of themselves, they generally can buy into that concept. I try to tell them, well, can you imagine that their feet have more of that earth than all the other bones? The feet are kind of concentrating with that earth energy. And if you took a transverse section of the feet, you'll see, more concentration of bones. And then I go further and I say, well, can you see even within the feet that the heels are even more of that earth with them? So I like to say that holistic schematics, that pattern keeps repeating themselves. All the bones have earth. The feet are more of a repository of that earth down below. And then even within the feet, the heels have that earth even stronger. So can you see how that holistic paradigm is working even on that level? Do you understand what I'm saying there? That makes sense to you?
Yeah, that does. And we talk a lot about when we are walking, and I guess even more so when we are barefoot, how we're really grounding and connecting to the earth. So that happens through the feet, right?
And then my big shtick here is that I believe that one of the problems of today is as little as we walk with soft things frequently underneath our feet, in our shoes. See not everybody, see patients, a lot of nurses in particular with their Crocs, these rubbery Crocs, for example, and it makes me cringe. And I'm not saying you can't wear a Croc, but what my point is that as little as we walk, what I oftentimes will preface it and say, patient, is earth hard or is it soft? And they come to realize, well, earth is hard, it's not soft. The water principle is about the softness of sorts. Earth is meant to be hard. And what I try to make them realize is that in the modern era, it's almost like we're doing an experiment in ourselves and we're trying to see how little earth we can take in ourselves and still function. So my point is that we put soft, thick gobs of material underneath our heels, underneath our soles for that matter, and we don't hardly walk at all, becoming earth energy deficient. And that plays out in that lack of sturdiness that comes into us. We're becoming softer. I don't like always to say it that way, but we're getting softer and not sturdy, and we've lost a lot of our resilience because of it. So it's another, and I play with the concept of the Chinese medicine. I use a lot of herbs and the 5 elements of acupuncture. Just so you know, the 4 elements, nature did not stop with 4 elements. The cosmos did not stop with 4. The Chinese have the 5 elements. And I'm not like a dogmatic person that it's 4 and that's it. But 4 are the foundational cardinal foursome. 4 came before the 5. The Chinese have the 5 elements, for example, and even the 6th element I like to call, which is their metal. But anyhow, that earth element plays out in the stomach. That's where I wanted to go there in Chinese medicine. And a lot of people have stomach issues also because of that lack of earth energy, as I see it, as I teased it out when I do different tests on my patients. So a big part of my practice in my office is really helping people to have better posture and alignment and sturdiness and a respect for that earth element by understanding how to walk, what I also say is, then I go forward or go from there and say, well, where are the heels of the body, heels of the feet? And I say, they realize, well, it's the back side of the foot. And what I say is, what the foot does is it gives us a code to understand how these principles are playing out in our body. Can you see, Petra, how good posture, how poor posture, we kind of collapse forwardly, we sit too much, we're playing on our computers, our cell phones, things in that order that bring us forward. So we all kind of know intuitively that good posture and alignment, we bring ourselves back. And that's where that heel is. That's where that earth element is strongest. That's where our backbone is. The 4 elements are very, what's beautiful about them in my mind is they're practical, they're poetic, I believe, as you understand them more, they're scientifically validated. And I think that they're kind of spiritually inspiring. I'm hoping that some of you people might appreciate as they listen to this, that they do have that foursome of spiritual kind of a concept to them, and practical and scientific and poetic even.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the things that you're mentioning are, I think, familiar to our listeners who might be struggling with digestive issues or food sensitivities. If you're touching on, we're just not getting enough earth energy here.
Right, a lot of stomach issues and allergic issues come down to the stomach not producing enough stomach acid and things like that all relate to the ability of the stomach to stay strong with this kind of earth energy alignment, and even just better posture is better for the organs of the body for no other reason than that. It's useful to have that principle working within you.
I'm seeing a lot of young people too that have a hump on just at the base of their neck. I think it's from kind of looking down all the
Sure. Oh,
time at their
absolutely.
phones and devices. And you're right. I do notice that in the posture when I look at a lot of the younger people, they actually have a weird hump at the back of their neck.
It's kind of scary. I'm in a university area where I treat a lot of patients and we're students. And unfortunately, I even get to walk to work, a 20-minute, 1-mile walk from my home to my office at the university. And I see a lot of students who are anxious. They don't have good posture. Many of them know they don't have good posture. They really are aware that posture is useful to, they're focused on it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to make an impact in their lives. The future is our young people. And I feel it a privilege to interact with them in this way to make them more aware of posture. And a lot of them are more open to these 4 elemental principles than older people, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say that some of them I've heard about them through, Airbender and all those movies and things on that order. What's the movie that was recently out there that has elemental concepts, 4 element concepts? I like to believe that these 4 elements somehow get drawn into every generation somehow. In my day, we took classes in high school or earlier than that on Greek mythology, for example, and we were somehow made aware of these elements through the gods. Poseidon was obviously a water god, and Zeus perhaps an air god, things on that, or Apollo the fire, the sun. So we were made aware of them. I don't know if young people are so much aware of them today in that regard, but I'd like to believe that there's something that rings true in our human condition about these 4 principles. But unfortunately, we have been dumbed down, I would say, about them. And I'm on a mission to bring them forward against all odds. The odds are kind of against me in this modern world where we have other things to think about, right? I guess.
Yeah, but these are sort of the basics of our body, our mind, our environment, the universe. These are sort of the basic building blocks. So that's really important to talk about that and
Yeah, and if I
how
could just
that
say one more
affects us.
thing, could I give one more context what I'd like to give? And maybe it won't work for you, but what I'd like to say is that in today's world, that every generation has always been in the human condition more modern than the one before it. But in just 10, 20 years, even 5 years, that gulf between modern and what I like to call the primitive pole of the human condition has just expanded exponentially. And so this modern primitive polarity that no other creature really has, every generation of other creatures is pretty much the same as the previous one that came before it. There's little variations and all, but that gulf between the past and the future generations of humankind has gotten wide. And the stress that we feel today, I think, is coming out of that unrecognized gulf between the modern and the primitive. And what I say is what I like to suggest is that the modern pole is technology and the newness of life, and that it's always attractive to us. Part of human condition, we want new things, the excitability of newness. But I'd like to say the primitive pole is nature. That primitive pole is the things that are always there that we depend upon as foundational to higher level modern functioning. But the key point I'd like to suggest is that at the core of the primitive pole, the core of nature, are these 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth. And what they do is they give us really a clue, and more than a clue, they give us, if we can kind of tap into them, they give us, for lack of a better phrase now, these 4 principles that we need to balance in our life to bring balance with that modern pole. So they allow us an easy way, once we understand this 4-element code, this pattern, the more we can bring this gulf between the modern pole a little bit more together. Does that kind of make sense for you a little bit? It's a different way of seeing it, maybe modern, primitive, but...
Yeah, that to me makes a lot of sense when we look at even how much anxiety the younger generations experience today, or how much depression, even at young ages.
Yeah.
There is a change.
Too much stimulation of that.
Yeah.
Too much in a way. That's the fire principle, and all that light, all that gizmo of glittering screens. It's the fire principle in some fashion. I don't know if it's the way you would call it elegant, but it's a fire that is out of balance, if you can see it that way. And that's why people sense something's wrong, and they go for walks, and they, even if they have their little ear pods on and all that kind of stuff, they want to get out there and balance it out with something. What I try to have them what I'm really trying to do too is to help them to see as they're walking, let them know to heel strike more. So when you're going back to walking, there's ways of engaging that earth once you understand the power of the heel. And I try to tell my patients when you're walking, try to, as you're bringing that right foot forward, try to get its heel, that back half inch of its heel to engage the ground a little bit more. Bring your head back a little bit more on that side, even your shoulder blades, your elbow on that right side as your heel engages the ground. That all helps in channeling that earth force into your body. And interestingly enough, and I like to say it's very scientific, these four elements, as it turns out, because, let me add this, is I have patients who are older women, and they worry about osteoporosis. And that obviously is a breakdown in that earth element of bone. For women, hormonally, their earth element has a tendency to weaken out. And what science tells us is when you heel strike, there's actually an electrical force called a piezoelectrical force that enters your bones, that goes up your legs and stimulates your osteoblasts, which produce more bone. So the poetics of it is what I like to say is that when the earth within you, i.e. your bones, engage the greater earth below, this energetics gets created, this earth energy gets created that travels up your body and makes your own earth element stronger. And I would say it makes you stronger in that sturdiness quotient as well. I think it's kind of fun to feel like you're engaging these principles in your everyday activities, even.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I had no idea. So we all should walk a little bit more heel heavy when we're
I
out
like
there.
to think so. And thick, soft materials underneath your heels. I'm into the old-fashioned leather men's shoe. I walk to work with them. But I'm not saying you have to do that, but don't wear a thick sneaker. Thinner sneaker is actually better than a thicker sneaker. You don't want something that absorbs all that heel strike force. A lot of chiropractors even who don't acknowledge that, and they fit people with these shock absorption things that might not be really what you need. I don't think they are what you need. So I'm kind of an outlier in that regard as well.
Yeah, we get fitted with these really thick orthotics or rigid orthotics. And so
I use some orthotics, but I use more so arch supports that play with the water principle. Can you see how Earth? So let's talk about this a little bit, geometry of these elements, if you will. The joke is that that Columbus was wrong. The Earth is not round; it's flat. And if you have any doubts on that, ask your feet. So the feet, deal with that flatness of Earth, and the water principle is the roundness, the softness that arches, for example, give. So the feet kind of give a code for understanding how these principles embody themselves on every transverse level of our body. The backside of your skull, for example, just like the backside of your foot and the earth of it, backside of your skull would be the earth element. The occiput is the earth bone. And I'm not going to go into detail there, but just to kind of see where these things lead up to. And I've created this thing called 4-element yoga, which helps my patients and others to engage these principles and draw them into weaker parts of their body. So the point here, though, is just to realize that the arches, for example, the geometry of the foot has that roundness in the arch area. And for that matter, the big toe of the foot has a lot of that watery flesh to it. That helps you realize that water is operating here. You understand what I'm saying kind of there? Water is the medial portion of the body. And interestingly enough, the kidney meridian of acupuncture runs up the inner calves and inner thighs, and our right and left of our body, front and back, is the kidney and then the bladder. So these are just ways that many traditions have ways that they see these principles operating in them. And I'm an integrator. My path is to integrate all these different traditions, from the 4 elements of the West to the Chinese way of seeing the 5 elements to the chakras of yoga. They're all integrated in my book and in my practice and things like that. And then the actual anatomy of the body as well. Is that too much for you to handle?
I think that is really fascinating. And what's also really interesting is how these play out, as you said, when there's too much or too little. So when we talk about when we are losing earth energy, or what happens if we lose, for example, too much water energy or fire energy or air energy, how do these imbalances play out in our body or even mentally or emotionally for us?
Sure. No, those are good questions. the water energy of the body is, well, think of blood. So I like to say is bones of the body is the earth element. The fire is the nervous system with the brain up top. Okay, so the reservoir, again, we have these poles, a bead at the bottom with earth and the brain up top with that fire. And the fire courses through our body as nerves and the like. So this nervous system is the embodiment of the fire element. The blood would be the water element of the body. And water is the third element. I like to say often gets involved in threesomes. It's just the way it is. The cosmos, I'm not a numerologist per se, but I believe that there's a geometry of what numbers help to bring out. So the water element is the third element and in the top, and it deals with blood, but also deals with nutrition. And nutrition is what we get to bring into the blood via our visceral organs, our digestive system. So I like to say there's a threesome there. Our food, our visceral organs, and then our blood. The practical application here is that for the water element to be strong, we have to have good nutrition. It's as simple as that in many ways. And in the tradition of an herbalist, for example, though, we believe that plants, the biochemistry of plants, what nature does is it fractures the oneness, if you will. I don't want to get too metaphysical here, but what nature initially does is it fractures the oneness into the four parts, to four cardinal parts that kind of lock in. I use the metaphor of four right angles locking in within a circle, that oneness. And that's the fourth element, is that 90-degree angle that locks in and makes nature physical and makes these four principles, fire, air, water, earth, that really relate to oneness, the yin-yang two-ness, the balance of that yin-yang two-ness, the principle of connectedness or balance, and then that fourth principle of solid physicality. That's the metaphysics in a nutshell, in a sense. But getting back to water, so we have nutrition and herbs. So what nature does is it goes beyond just these four elements. It fractures into all the different life forms on this planet. Each have a way that they bring these four principles together. It should be made clear that all of life is built upon four genetic bases that come together in a myriad of ways. These four genetic bases of our genes create spider, they create dinosaurs, they create a thing of moss, and they create our human body. So four things do seem to come together in a most elegant ways. And plants, herbs embody those principles, and that's what herbal medicine is about. And so we can, when you work with an herbalist in some fashion or another, they're helping you to channel these principles into the blood of your body and into the physiology of your life. So we have food, blood, our visceral organs all being expression of the water principle. So if you want to be a healthier person, you want to bring that water energy into your body. I can go into detail on specific things for nutrition and all that. And I don't feel compelled to do that right now with this podcast, but there are some useful things to know. And one of them is to, even in eating spices, I encourage people to spice up their foods. Those are traditional ways that we've brought these more primitive principles, if you will, of the plant kingdom that go beyond the proteins, the starches, the sugars, and the fats of our meals to these other principles that show up as vitamins and minerals and other biochemistries of life. They're all ways that these four elements kind of find their ways in more sophisticated ways that humanity or life itself depends upon. So that's the water principle of nutrition. And if we don't have good nutrition, we start fracturing. We all have weaknesses in our own body. Being a chiropractor for 4 decades, you see people fracturing in different ways. And the more you can build up your resiliency in any one of these components, the stronger you are. So if you have better posture, you're going to have a little bit more resiliency in significant ways even. And healthy nutrition habits, understanding what healthy nutrition is. I like to say so many people eat denatured counterfeit foods. So just making people aware that there's these denatured processed foods that just doesn't have these life positive principles within them.
Yeah. And we know today that nutrition affects everything. It affects
Absolutely.
even our brain, our mental health, our body, everything. So
everything.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, good. And then if I can just say air for the heck of it is the air element. And this is where it kind of gets a little abstract, but I hope you and your listeners can follow through on this one. Think of air as the second element from the top down. So you got fire, air, water, earth. And using the geometry of 2, the second element is air. Think of the geometry of 2 as a line. And a line has those two arrows going on either end. And I like to think of it in metaphysical terms here. One arrow goes to the biggest big, and the other arrow goes to the smallest small. All those yin-yang opposites were created with God, the creator, the spirit of life, whatever you want to say, just the mathematical logic of a cold cosmos came up with two-ness. And those opposites, we tend to think of opposites as attracting, but in the realm of two-ness, what are they doing there, Patriot? They're going in opposite directions, aren't they? And somehow those two come together. And that's what three is all about. That's what a triangle is all about. But until that happens, until water, the principle of water comes along, the principle of balance, that triangulating principle of water, which is balance, comes in, they're going in opposite directions. And what I like to say is that two-ness principle, what's between the arrows of those two arrows is space is created, endless space. And we walk through that space without even thinking of it as a principle, but it is a principle. It's a cosmic necessity to have this spaciousness of the cosmos as the air principle. And what moves us through space are our muscles. That's what I wanted to lead up to. In a logical, poetic, and I think validating way, our muscles are the air element of the body. They move us through space. They give us elbow room. As we push out with our elbows into right and left, we get our elbow room space, and that requires muscles. So the muscular robustness, and what I like to tell my patients is that muscular robustness is what the Chinese call, in my opinion, qi. I think that qi is really that robustness within an organ. Every organ, every cell, every life form needs its qi, its elbow room, its ability to feel self-empowered. That self-empowerment is the realm of the air principle. So that's the muscles of the body. So there's the four elements within the body: bones, blood, muscles, and nerves. Kind of simple, right?
I like that. That's a really great way of explaining that and laying that out for our listeners. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, it does. And in the way that you've explained it, how that affects us when things are too much or too little,
right?
well, we can see those direct effects.
Well, one of the problems of today is, in a practical matter, is we don't have enough things to make us muscularly robust. I mean, it's fair to say our sedentary habits are not muscularly robust ones typically. Yeah. That's why people go to the gym and work out, because there's this innate intelligence that tells them, I got to get my muscles used more. And so many scientific studies are telling us more and more that just getting up every half hour from a sedentary chair has amazingly significant health effects. I mean, it truly is a pretty amazing thing. What I like to tell my patients, when I repeat to them, they tell me they remember it 5 years later. I remember, Dr. W, you telling me life is movement, movement is life. So that movement is all about that muscular robustness that triggers vitality or vigor into our being. And so, yes, there's the power of the four elements in our body. Now, I'd like to go further, if you have time, to how they manifest in our mind.
Yeah. That would be fantastic, because I was just thinking, we have an obesity crisis, we have a mental health crisis, we have chronic illness, chronic pain crisis in the world. Right. Let's put this all together. And yes, let us know how that works out when we come to the mind.
Okay, I'll do my best. And let me say this I'd like to get just metaphysical for one more moment here and say can you see how body and spirit are kind of like two opposites? There's that we're a body and a spirit, the fire and earth in a sense, is that spirit is the fire element within us, and the body is that physical earth of us. And the mind is kind of that triangulating part of us that is trying to balance. So in a sense, I guess what I want to lead up to is the mind, in many ways, is the water element within us that's balancing not just this, let me put it this way, that all the yin-yangs of the human condition have to be balanced out to make us who we are. And that is what we call mind. And in nature, what I like to also say, in nature is spirit and matter. Okay, this is what I wanted to really say earlier. Is you see how spirit and matter are kind of like these two poles of the cosmos, if you will. And what nature is that the ability of those opposites to come together. So when people like me and you perhaps and your listeners feel that there's a spiritual glow to the natural world, it truly is there. Nature is physical, but it also has that spiritual pull to it. So nature has brought spirit and matter together. And my point here is that in the same way that I'm going to just back up a little bit and just say how water is also the third element that brings opposites together, triangulates them a little bit. That's what our mind does. So our mind resonates with this threeness principle of water and nature. It might seem a little concocted there, but I truly believe that there's some resonance between the mind and this threeness principle. That mind is kind of that third thing. So it's kind of like spirit, body, and then mind, if you will. Fire, earth, and then water in this threeness before you get to the four. Anyhow, within the mind, you have to have that practicality. We all need to be practical. That's the earth element within us, is to be practical. And what I like to say, fire element is you have an idea in your mind. So you have the idea that I want to go out to dinner with my friend. So the light flashes in your brain, an idea, the light bulb goes off. And that's the fire element, creating an idea, being creative. People who are creative have a lot of fire element within them. All right. So that's the creative process of having an idea of something. But then you got to figure out the howness. And that relates to the question words. So let me just throw this in for the heck of it. Is there's these primal question words I suggest is what, how, why, and where. So think of what has the highest of them. So you have this idea of what do I want to do? Go out to dinner with my friends. And then you got to strategize on how you're going to do it. That's the intellect, the logic, the strategizing. So people with a lot of air element are kind of thinking people. They like to think things out. They like to strategize how to get from here to there. Not everybody likes that. I have an intellectual mind. I'm a Gemini. Air element people tend to have that air element strong, that intellectual process. But everybody has them. Whether you're fire, air, water, earth, you have all these principles within us. Some are stronger than others. So the intellect is that air element that tries to figure out how to do something. And then you got to figure out, before you get your foot out the door, you have to answer that thing of, well, why? Why do I really want to get? You have to have a good enough reason to get your foot out the door. You'll hem and haw, and maybe you'll cancel out if that whyness is just not there strong enough. So that's the water principle. The water principle is about the whyness. Air is a little bit more logical. Whyness is kind of deeper, our needs. So the human needs that we each have are more an expression of a more substantive, denser water element. Does that make sense? Water is a heavier element than the coolness of the intellect. So the whyness of our lives is sort of that water principle. So if somebody is not manifesting what they want, what's the issue there? Do they lack that passion, that whyness? Are they not thinking things out clear enough and they're making mistakes and getting discouraged? Are they just not seeing practical ways of applying their knowledge base? Are they not being creative enough? Are they not connecting to people? The water principle is about connecting, building relationships. That's all part and parcel of the water element, for example. So that's, in a nutshell, how these four elements kind of play out in our human mind, in the human condition of the what, how, why, and where. So then you got to get your awareness into the equation. And if you get your foot out the door and all of a sudden that restaurant's no longer there, that awareness, that physicality isn't there, or you go somewhere else, that awareness of, so the awareness, that physicality of where you want to get to is that earth element. Reasonable, right? Logical, even poetic, right?
I like that. I like how you've kind of brought all this together.
I like to think so. And then I'm going to say one more thing in the human condition, even, which is kind of spirit. So we have body, mind, and spirit. So the human spirit, the human condition is something that we're all part of tapping into, and we're all there sharing our human spirit, the human condition. And what I like to say is our need to have ideals. So just like the fire element within the mind is being ideas, in the human condition, it's having ideals, having certain principles, ideals that we can tap into, that we recognize as higher level. And one of the things I like to say is that order from fire, air, water, and earth, that there's that part of the human condition is that we recognize a high and a low. And that part of our journey, I believe, is that we're meant to recognize that and to move always upward. We're meant to have some lowly experiences and whatever you want to call it, but we're meant in the course of our life, in the balance of our lives, to always be moving up toward that higher fire element, our ideals of our human condition. And if we don't have ideals, we just won't reach our highest potential. In America right now, we have political issues, and I feel as though, the idealism of America, why it's been such an important player, in our modern world today is I think America has somehow embodied democracy and freedom and all that kind of thing. We've had our idealism very strong. Now I don't want to get too political, but our idealism by one of these candidates is just kind of tapping down with the lowness. There's a materialistic coarseness that takes us away from that higher level functioning that we call human idealism. That's the fire element of our human condition. And then we moved down to air. Air would be the concept of science. Science is to be culturally, I guess moving upward is the concept of air within our human condition, is that we are meant to be wired to move up. But I do want to mention that science within the condition is the air element. And what does science do? It takes advantage of that yin-yang opposition of two, and it teases out yin and yang, smaller two-nesses as it dissects. Science is sort of the collective intellect of human beings as they tease out all those yin-yang opposites in the natural world, or the human world for that matter. If you're a political scientist, you're dissecting the opposites, the yin-yang opposites of what humankind is all about. And then you got science as the air element, and then you have the arts, which would be the way that humankind kind of balances in aesthetic ways, elegant ways, productive ways, hopefully, these yin-yang opposites into something of beauty. Beauty, in my way of thinking, is elegant balances of these oppositions. And when you recognize beauty, I believe you're recognizing these principles in balance. And I think that's kind of nice to see beauty as somehow your innate recognition of these principles. They aren't necessarily, the fire, air, water, and earth principles. There are other principles, like I'm saying, that are somehow you're finding in balance. Aesthetically, you're noticing them as beauty. And it's a wonderful thing as in humankind to be able to acknowledge and appreciate beauty. And then in the earthy realm of our human condition, similar to what I've said before, is just the practicality, but it's also the technology. Technology would be an earth element. Part of the human condition is building technology and the like, is applying our sciences to the here and now of where we are. That's it in a nutshell. All these interesting four element ways of seeing our body, mind, and our spirit, right?
Yeah, it's quite intricate. I mean, I can see how you've spent 4 decades on this. It's quite in depth. So,
but I feel like it's
fascinating.
Put together in a relatively short time. But if you want to hear, get it in bigger pieces or whatever, I have a lot of videos on it and a book and all that kind of thing. And I'd like to think that as people experiment and think about it, just meditating and that kind of thing is a fire element endeavor. We all have our own ways that we are drawn to bring these 4 principles into ourselves. We all have different aptitudes. And different listeners out there might realize, well, maybe I need to maybe I need to learn new things. I feel, there's a lot of people out there that feel depressed and they don't know where to go. And this 4 element paradigm might say, well, you know what? Air is the uplift. So I like to say air is a very powerful force in our human condition. I like to call it the uplift. What does nature's air do? It moves upward in that y-axis of space, the uplift principle. The air is the principle of learning new things. And new things tend to make us more hopeful and make life more interesting. We want to live an interesting life, don't we? Interestingness, or whatever, is an air element functionality within our human condition, whereas living an inspired life might be a more fire element way of, we want to live an inspired life. We want that fire element of being inspired. We want the air element of having an interesting life, of seeing interesting things around us. We want to be engaged to learn more about how the world works because it's interesting. And if you're depressed, damn it, learn something new to made buoyant. And sometimes it's not always easy. And people go on their TikTok things and they think that they're learning something new. Oftentimes they're being brought down low by some foolish entertainment. So in a sense, entertainment is kind of this water element portion of a human life. It's art, but it might not be the highest level of art kind that we're seeing in our TikTok feeds. You should be challenged. If you're anxious and you're not being motivated, maybe you need to take on a deeper dive by learning things in a deeper way, in a broader way. That air element your intellect gets made stronger with a deeper dive into a topic. find your topic that you find interesting and learn more about it, and you'll be a smarter person and you'll be a happier person. So that's sort of the one way to apply these things. And for some people, they lack the ability to have a passion for something. And sometimes it's a matter of learning something new that might spark their interest. Sometimes it's a matter of healthier nutrition. It could be a matter of walking and just being inspired by nature and people you engage that you relate to, conversation you had that relates you to something that stirs you up. Listening to a podcast and relating to this person that you're listening to might motivate you. So we're motivated by other people around us, by things that we engage. Things in that order are all part of the human condition that make living an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that and taking us on this journey through the 4 elements in all different aspects of our lives and our body and mind. This is so fascinating. And you've spent a lot of time putting this all together. And of course, you've written a book as well. And would you like to let our listeners know if they're curious now by what we've been talking about and they want to connect or find out more, how can they do that? And of course, they could come and work with you in person if they live where you live. But any other ways that they could connect and find some resources on this?
Sure. I'm semi-retired now, but I have patients that do come see me from far away. But most people can get a lot of information from going to fourelementdoctor.com, F-O-U-R, doctor, 4-O-U-R, elementdoctor.com. They could also go to YouTube, 4Element Doctor. I do have a presence on TikTok, 4Element Doctor. And I do have a Patreon platform where there's a subscription service that I have some of my deeper dives, and it's 4Element Doctor there as well. And I do have that book that they can find on my website, 4Element Doctor. I'm hoping to do research. I've created what's called the 4Element Institute that I'm trying to do research on applying this in a variety of different manners. So that's where I'm spending quite a bit of time trying to develop that. But I'm happy to engage people in these ways. You can probably reach me in one of these platforms if somebody has a strong desire to do so. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully you got something out of it and your listeners as well.
Yeah, amazing. And thank you for sharing those resources. And I will just add here that we will be linking to all of Dr. Walsdorf's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for the links to connect on the site, to find his book, connect online on the socials. We will put all those links in the show notes for you. And we definitely encourage you to find out more about these 4 elements, because as you can see, there's a lot to it. It goes quite in depth in our lives and in how we live and how we feel. And that is a huge thing that we can also add to our healing journey. I definitely encourage you to connect with Dr. Walsdorf and learn a bit more about what he talked about today and what we dove into today in this episode. Thank you, Dr. Walsdorf, for being here today and spending this time with us and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge about this amazing topic. I know that there's so much more that we could talk about, but we're going to
another time. But yeah, well, hopefully I didn't throw too much. I do tend to try getting everything in. I like to think people get something that speaks to them out of it, and they can always learn more if they need to. Those resources that you have there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with others out there. Thank you, Petra.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I think we've given a really great overview of this topic. And like you said, if our listeners want to dive deeper, they can definitely do that and go online and find out more. So with that, we will wrap it up today. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. Thank you, Dr. Walsdorf, for joining us today. I truly, truly appreciate it. And take good care of yourself.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.